All right. All right. So, Dr. Ben Oberts, I am here with, I just hit the recording button. This is a personal friend of mine, students. This is a good guy who literally was single-handedly the gentleman who helped me through my college chemistry degree. And I'm very blessed. And we got to stand up in each other's weddings. So this is a good guy to know. But Dr. Oberts, or Ben, I'm going to call you because you're my brother. Ben, I appreciate you coming on. And we just kind of want to know your pathway from high school to where you ended up, and then just a little bit about your job and kind of every day what it's about. I think that's a great learning experience for students. So again, thanks for taking the time. And if you don't mind, kind of take us through the path of how you ended up where you are today.
All right, so the path of how I became Dr. Oberts, or as my wife likes to call me, fake doctor. I can't stand up when someone says, "Is there a doctor in the house?"
No, they still have to call the ambulance. It's true.
Yeah, it's a PhD, not an MD, she likes to remind me. But so starting off, high school, I came from a very science-oriented family. As Phil knows, he's met my family. So I was pushed / encouraged into science, though my parents were very flexible in terms of what I was going to go into, what I wanted to do. They didn't necessarily force me into chemistry, but I was drawn to it. It's in the family. But as such, my mom made it very clear to me going into high school that study hall, things like that, were not going to be things that I was going to be able to take. I had to fill my class load with classes geared towards making myself prepared for college. Now, I was a bit of a slacker in high school, so, that wasn't exactly great news, but I kind of relied more on my general ability in some of these things, my ability to kind of uptake some of the information and just kind of regurgitate it to get through high school. But that said, there was challenging. I had to take, pre-cal and all those kinds of things. Physics, I took 2 years of chemistry. My high school offered general chemistry and then AP chemistry. And by that point, I knew I wanted to do something in chemistry, so I took that course as well. But I filled my time with other types of classes. I took drafting, woodworking, metalworking. So there was a lot of different types of offerings that my high school had that I was able to take, including computer-aided drafting, to kind of round myself out, particularly the computer aspect. Science and computers nowadays go hand in hand. So the more computer work you can get your hands on, especially software, even just being able to really understand even the office programs, which sounds boring, and it is, but using styles and other things like that, those are going to be skills that would be very helpful. I wish I knew more about that back then that like I know now, but those things would be very helpful to help for kind of round that my high school experience off. I after that went to ISU for my undergrad. ISU, yes, Illinois State. That's where I met Phil. But yeah, so I joined the chemistry program at ISU. Now, though AP chemistry allows you to test out of general chemistry, I did okay on the AP exam. I think I could have tested out of it, but a discussion with my family and just overall opinion was it'd be better to take that course again, and so I did. And I will say, definitely coming out of high school, where I kind of felt like, whatever. Going into college was kind of an eye opener. Going to college, going to what you want to do, getting into those classes was vastly different because you're looking at classes that you care about mostly. You still got to take some stuff that make you a good person and will round you out, but you're taking courses in your field of interest, and that vastly changes everything because now you're committed to it. And in my case, I kind of threw myself into it, and that's helped me succeed. But coming in, taking that course again, even though I kind of had the AP material in there, really helped me understand it. And now I was fortunate that I have two brothers. They're both 10 years older than me. They're in science, and one of them is a chemical engineer. And so my mom kind of looked at his experience going to Michigan and applied it to my experience going to ISU. In particular, he skipped classes because he could, and then he kind of paid for it because then he wasn't quite up to the same speed. So coming into college, my mom said, why don't you take that again? Why don't you spend a little that money, that time, really kind of invest into it and get a really good knowledge and base? And that really helped me. High school gets you very good and prepared, but even so, it's still an eye opener.
Yeah, and
And I
Ben, if
even
I
see
can
that.
jump in really
Yeah.
quick, I think we had a little slightly different experience. You took Chem and AP. I was not an AP student, so I didn't even know about AP classes. But in the end, we started school the same time, same classes. I would agree that with your AP knowledge, you were definitely more confident and prepared than me. But in the end, a lot of my students were academic and were not going to take AP. It is possible still to go into a degree of Chem. I would just say that I may have to grind a little bit harder than you from a perspective of that, just how much material you've gone over and covered versus me with just my academic background. But I want to make that clear to students
Yeah.
that you don't have to do AP in order to get into it. But I think you definitely, it showed your confidence level
Yeah.
was different than mine.
Yeah, and I would completely agree. It's not APs. It's helpful, especially if you're wanting to go into the hard sciences. Is that's you're not if you're going into academia or things like that. I don't think the AP class would probably be worth your time. If you know going before college that I wanted to teach, maybe even teach sciences, I don't know if the AP class would be the best approach. There's probably some other classes that you could take that would maybe lend your some knowledge to those skills that you would need in terms of speaking in front of people or conveying knowledge of all those kinds of things, where I didn't get some of that until more when I was going close to grad school, where I had to convey scientific information to a scientific crowd of 100 200 people.
Right.
And so that there's a little difference there, and I would definitely agree with it. You don't have to have the AP courses. I just did, and that's how it kind of worked out for me.
Okay, so Ben, you did your career at ISU, and we end up graduating. And at that time, after 4 years, we kind of had different decisions to make, right?
Yeah.
I was student teaching and went that world, and now the students listening to this are stuck with me right now. But you had a way different, a boatload of different options. So do you want to kind of talk about that and how grad school came about?
Yeah. So as Phil said, like our 4 years kind of came to an end. Now we could already see that we started to take different paths at that point, as he pointed out. He was doing more of the teaching, student teaching, getting prepared for all that. Or I had a co-op, an internship in industry. So I worked at Pfizer for 7 months, my last year of school, and that helped prepare me for more of an industry approach. Now that definitely kind of made a conflicting situation for me. Do I go to industry and make money, or do I go to grad school and further my degree? I think I made the right decision. Some of it is timing and how the world economy is and all that kind of stuff. Because I will tell you, at the time when I looked for jobs towards the end of graduation of my bachelor's, everything was PhD, PhD, PhD required. And after I got my PhD, everything was bachelor's, bachelor's, bachelor's. But some of that was because of the financial and economic situation. I graduated with my PhD in 2009 in the economic downturn, the recession. They want, less talent with less money. So it's some of it, you can never guess that. But yeah, so at that time, I had to make that decision. I was fortunate. I got into Michigan State for grad school, and I decided, after much thinking about it, because again, at that point, it's a big change. You're committing yourself to more school. Typically, by that point, you're like, "Oh, I'm done with school." But a few things with science grad school. First off, depending on what you're going into science-wise for grad school, a lot of times they pay you to go to grad school. I didn't. I paid $50 a semester at Michigan State at my time, because I was doing research into things that the school would be able to patent potentially and sell. And so you got to keep in mind, you're pretty much working for the university, not necessarily working for yourself. Yeah, you're getting that education, you're advancing maybe basic research, chemistry or physics or whatever, but you're working for the university, and as a result, they pay you in terms of a minimal pay to live and eat, and not having to pay school. Right.
It's huge.
Yeah, and that is huge. Or, I talked to some English or other majors that are, on the sociologies, things like that. They don't, they had to pay to go to grad school. And then they all kind of look at me dumbfounded, like, well, I didn't pay. I don't have student loans anymore because I didn't pay more. And so they all think that's crazy. But that does happen. Going into a university setting for grad school, a lot of times for sciences, you don't have to pay, they'll pay you. That's not a guarantee, depends on the school and everything else, but it's something to keep in mind. It's if you think financially you're going to be out of reach, that might not be the case. You'd have to investigate those programs and figure out what the situation would be. Now, that being said, I did decide to go to grad school, go into Michigan State. Grad school is a different ballgame. I took grad classes as an undergrad, but it's not the same, right? You're there, it's your career. Ideally, they want you there to do your work and not do any other jobs. And so you kind of have to really work on budgeting your time at school and research and then being able to live. The other kicker too with grad school is you're there for as long as your research works. And what I mean by that is that I was fortunate, I got out in 4 years. That's rare. And it's not because I'm smarter than the next guy or anything else. I was lucky and my research worked. I got a research project. I was able to advance and work. I had friends that were in my same program doing different research projects. They were there for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, not because they're stupid or they couldn't do the work. It's just their project was not working sometimes or had more issues and it took longer. So it's not necessarily based on how well you do in terms of how smart you are and the like. But it's different. The classes, I don't have to take as many classes, but you're in the lab, you're doing research in the sense of you're getting in the lab, you're doing actual experiments. You have to design those experiments. It's not a book anymore where it says add A and B and you get C. You have to figure out what A and B is and then hopefully know what C is once you get it out. And if you don't, you have to figure it out. And so that can be challenging, but it's also in my case, very interesting, very cool, because you get your hands on a lot of different instrumentation, right? You get to, all that instrumentation you work on in high school or in college, it's there for you to use based on your experiments. You have to figure out all the parameters and how to use it. You have to go through those types of procedures and understand how the experiment's working. And by this point too, you probably have an idea, but you're still working on formulating it out, So when Phil goes to the front of the board and writes out a chemical equation, you're doing that yourself, figuring out, okay, if I do these things, how does this work with that? And working it all out so that way you're designing your experiment space and performing it.
Yeah, I think when we learn the basics in high school, though, I mean, I geek out on it because I loved it, but I think a lot of students naturally are like, when do I use this? But I think really the power, like you just showed, is that when you know the basics decent, that's when you really get into the cool stuff, the problem solving, hey, I've got this idea. How the heck am I going to make this work with this machine? And all of a sudden you're using it for something so much more complex than, like you said, my recipe cooking labs mix this with this and look for that. And it changed color,
Yeah. And that's a very good point in terms of where do you put these two together? I don't think back or I don't do something and think, that was from high school. No, I don't think that. It's just in my head.
Right.
And so, as I'm doing my daily job, I just know it. Like I know like the first 2 rows of the periodic table. Why? Not because I decided to memorize it. It's just I use it so often that I know it. Right. And so those are things that start in high school and work their way through your career. So maybe this is going to go against what Phil said, but I wouldn't say
it's okay
necessarily. Don't worry about, oh my goodness, how am I going to memorize all this stuff? Well, first off, you're not going to, unless Phil says you need to memorize for the exam, you're probably not going to need to memorize it. Most things that you're going to learn in your high school career are tools that you get build on and build on and build on throughout high school and college. So when you do get to grad school or the industry or whatever, they're just in your head. You just do them. It's like muscle memory. You just kind of do it, and you don't really worry about it because you know that's the fact. You know that's why it happens, and you do it. And then there are other things that you'll just use guidebooks, or you'll look up research papers or things like that you apply. And that's a lot of what grad school is. Being able to perform solid research into what other people did and apply it to what you're trying to do. And being able to take that and then work in the lab to physically manifest that in the lab. And so it's a little different. It's very challenging. And, you know, your research can, at least in chemistry, can change vastly. I'm being a teacher as well. I'd like to tell my students, at least I teach college, that you're not, physics, chemistry, and biology used to be separate subjects, but that's not really the case anymore. No. Yeah, you go into college and you might be bio or chemistry, but it's so interlinked anymore, and that's become so interlinked because of the way the sciences work. You know, biochemistry, biophysics, you know, chemistry and physics especially are very linked.
Yeah.
And, you know, you're talking about elementary particles and how they build up to protons, electrons, and neutrons, and then how that applies to chemistry. It's so very linked that you just can't get away from it. And an example would be in my grad school career, I worked a lot with laser systems. So the lasers and all the tables and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And, you know, I built an instrument when I was in grad school. It was one of my first projects, using a laser to funnel it into a microscope to perform imaging experiments. And that was probably more physics and engineering than it was chemistry, but we needed to apply that to chemistry. But it also gave me a huge foundation of how instruments work, how you build an instrument to function, to do what you want. And that included programming a computer to do the software that I needed to analyze and take an image. And so there was a lot in there. And so a lot of hands-on time, a lot of working tools and, you know, plumbing, optics, and all that kind of thing. And then working on the computer to build my software program. There's a computer program called LabVIEW that is commonly used for these types of programs. But so it gives a visualization UI to do like C++ programming or any other types of general programming.
Now, we don't really know quite what that is. Just really quick, and I think we have about 3 minutes left. I don't want to take up too much of your time too, but C++ and all that, what is that in general? What does that mean?
Those are like computer languages.
Okay.
So computer code languages and the like. I don't know a lot about in terms of like the writing those languages, but there are tools that help you do that without having to get deep into how to program, like writing out the language codes. Sure. And all that. So, okay, so I can keep rambling for hours. And so
no, I appreciate it. You've talked a great deal about college and grad school and kind of the skills in that. With about 2 minutes left in that, we'd love to know, what do you do and what's a typical day like for you as a chemist, Dr. Oberts?
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of split this as quickly as I can into two different categories. Straight out of grad school, I was in the lab. I worked for a pharmaceutical company, and as such, I was doing work in the lab. So I was utilizing, we call it method development. So I worked for a generic company, and so as we were making generic drugs, I was in product development side of it. So as you develop those drugs, you have to have ways of analyzing them, because you have to prove what is in the drug, and that there's no impurities and everything else. And so we would have to work on mostly HPLC, which is high performance liquid chromatography, but various other techniques to analyze those drugs for the necessary components. So how much drug is in the drug? If it says 1 milligram per milliliter, it better have 1 milligram per milliliter or very close to it. How many impurities is there and all that. And so there are guidelines that the industry follows by the FDA, the USP, which is another organization that's non-government based that helps regulate pharmaceuticals, and some other places as well, because we also marketed in Europe. And we had to follow those guidelines to create methods that would prove our drug was suitable, and not just suitable in the generic space, prove that it also matched the name brand. And so you'd have to do a lot of work in the lab to create that. So creating methods, changing parameters in the instrument, analyzing the drugs, analyzing impurities, analyzing all these different things to try to get data to support your claims that the drug was safe, that it matches the name brand, and so on and so forth. And then you'd pool that data together with the rest of the team to send it off to the FDA for approval. So that was my initial out of grad school work, going into the lab doing that. And I did that for several years. I was doing that kind of work for a good 5 to 6 years until I got promoted to a more supervisory position where I was still doing that, but I was also coordinating the work with people that were reporting to me. And then eventually, a couple years after that, to a management position where I was no longer in the lab, but I was still coordinating my team. Now, the second half of that is I've switched jobs to a new position at another pharmaceutical company, but this is a completely different approach. So depending on your experience coming in, you could either be going into the lab, which is generally as people come out of college, they're usually put into the lab to work their skills and build their industry knowledge. However, if you've been in the industry for a while, the job I have now is with a virtual pharmaceutical company. And what that means is that we don't have lab space. I work with the computer and with contract laboratories and contract manufacturers to develop our drugs and manufacture them. So I create an entire program for whatever drug that we are looking to produce, and I have to encompass all the necessary analytical chemistry needs for that. And so I have large overall guides of what needs to be done for every ingredient that goes in, so that the drug itself, which we call an active pharmaceutical ingredient, or any excipients, which is the extra stuff in there to make it more stable or to make it not change color or whatever, right? And so I have to coordinate all of that testing, as well as all the testing for the finished product once it's been manufactured. And then we have to test it for 2 years on a stability program to show and tell the FDA, look, our product is the same chemically, it's the same numbers base, so quantitatively, and then it's the same stability. And there are other things that might be needed in terms of clinical trials. It reacts the same in people, that kind of thing. And so we have to coordinate those studies as well. So in this, my newer position, yes, I'm on the computer more often. Pretty much my day is in front of a computer, but I haven't lost the need for any of those skills I have learned, because if anything, I almost need them more now, because everything I'm talking and working with people is on the computer. It's no longer just going into the lab and trying it. You know, you have to work virtually. I have to work with these contract labs to discuss issues, discuss plans, I don't think that method might be the best. Why don't we make changes X, Y, Z? Using my knowledge that I've gained throughout my career, gained throughout high school and college, to direct those people. And so while I don't have direct reports, I'm directing contract labs, I'm directing manufacturing, to make decisions so that our product can be manufactured to the highest standards and be considered a generic equivalent to help patients get the cheaper drugs that they need and make sure the market still has the drugs that they need.
Wow. That's awesome. I'm going to wrap things up here. I'm sorry. I have a class meeting actually at 10 a.m. So, but first of all, Dr. Oberts, Ben, thank you so much for your time. A couple things to recap that were so great. Knowledge is great, just having a foundation, because you went with chemistry, but it sounds like you're doing a lot of physics and a lot with computer work that overlaps with coding and knowledge, communications, management of people. So when you're a well-rounded person, it sounds like that can't hurt you, because there's so many different avenues.
Yeah. And that's one thing, especially the communication and working with people. Scientists tend to be very aloof and kind of, isolate themselves from other people in social situations. That's not everyone, but that's kind of the overall look. And people can be great scientists, but terrible managers.
Right.
And so if that's a path you want to take, you need to work on those communication skills, working with people, being able to compromise, especially when it's not necessarily you going into the lab and you're telling people to do stuff. You have to be able to compromise and show them the value of the work they're doing. Because if they don't see any value in it, they're not going to want to do it.
Right.
And so you want to show them the big picture and include them in that vision going forward. A lot of management just isolates their workers. You don't want to do that. So.
Understood. Well, I can't thank you enough for your time. This has been so valuable, and I think a lot of the chemistry classes are going to enjoy this. It's just good to hear examples in that. But thanks for your time. Stay safe at home, man, okay? And hopefully I'll see you like Christmas or something.
Yeah,
All right. Thanks, man. Take care.
Yeah.